Imagine spending your entire life fighting to reach the highest level of professional football. The grueling practices, the injuries, the sacrifices. You make it. You play in front of millions. You cash checks most people can only dream about. And then, when it's all over, instead of walking away with your dignity intact, you steal, not from a stranger, not from a corporation, from the very healthcare system designed to protect you and your teammates. From elderly Americans fighting Alzheimer's and dementia. From disabled veterans who serve this country. 6 former NFL players did exactly that. And the amounts they stole and the methods they used will genuinely shock you. One of them walked away with nearly $200 million before the federal government caught up with him. This is the story of NFL players' insurance fraud, and what happens when men who had everything decided it still wasn't enough. Before we get into the individual stories, you need to understand something about life after the NFL. The average career lasts about 3.5 years. The body breaks down, the income stops, and for players who spent their entire identity being football players, the transition out of the league can be devastating. Some go into broadcasting, some go into business, some quietly struggle, and some, as you're about to find out, decide to take a very different path. Today we're going deep on 6 former NFL players convicted of insurance and healthcare fraud. Some of their stories will make you angry. Some will make you sad. All of them will make you think twice about what really goes on behind the headlines. Let's start with the biggest case in NFL history. Joel Rufus French. Joel Rufus French never made a Pro Bowl. He never won a Super Bowl ring. He played 3 seasons with the Seattle Seahawks before his NFL career quietly ended. But what he did after football, that became one of the most staggering healthcare fraud cases in American history. We're talking about a scheme that stole nearly $200 million. Not $2 million, not $20 million, $200 million. Let that number sit for a moment. To understand how French pulled this off, you have to understand what he built after leaving the NFL. On the surface, it looked legitimate. He started a marketing company. Then he became the beneficial owner of not 1, not 2, but 8 different durable medical equipment companies. If you don't know what durable medical equipment is, think knee braces, back braces, orthotic devices, the kind of equipment Medicare pays for when a doctor says a patient needs it. That last part, when a doctor says a patient needs it, is the key detail. Because Joel French figured out a way to get Medicare and the VA's healthcare program to pay for equipment that patients never asked for, never wanted, and in some cases could not physically use. Here's how the scheme worked. French set up overseas telemarketing call centers. These weren't your average call centers. They were specifically designed to target the most vulnerable Americans, elderly people suffering from dementia and Alzheimer's. People who might agree to something without fully understanding what they were agreeing to. The telemarketers would call these individuals, pressure them into providing their personal information and their health insurance details, then convince them, or simply sign them up, to receive orthotic braces. The braces would be billed to Medicare. Medicare would pay, and the money would flow back to French and his network. But it gets worse, much worse, because French didn't stop at targeting people who were still alive. Federal prosecutors revealed during trial that French and his co-conspirators billed Medicare for orthotic braces for amputees, for limbs those patients no longer had. They billed for braces for deceased patients. People who had already died were still generating revenue for Joel French's operation. Think about the level of calculated coldness that requires. This wasn't a desperate man making a mistake. This was a sophisticated, deliberate operation designed to bleed a government healthcare program dry, one fraudulent claim at a time. And French didn't just let the money sit in a bank account. He laundered it. Court documents show he laundered approximately $225,000 in cash alone. At one point, over $10,000 in cash was placed in a bag, physically placed in a bag, and driven to Orlando, Florida, to pay accomplices who had sold him beneficiaries' personal information. This was organized crime. It just happened to be run by a former NFL player. When federal investigators finally caught up with him, the scope of what they uncovered was staggering. French was convicted after a 6-day jury trial in February 2026 on multiple counts: conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and wire fraud, conspiracy to commit money laundering, and conspiracy to offer, pay, solicit, and receive kickbacks. The sentence handed down by the federal judge? 196 months in federal prison. That's over 16 years. He was also ordered to pay back $110 million in restitution and forfeit approximately $17 million in assets seized from his bank accounts. Joel French walked onto an NFL field as a wide receiver at Ole Miss, a two-time first-team All-SEC selection who caught 84 passes for 814 yards and 4 touchdowns across 3 college seasons. He had real talent. He made it to the highest level of professional football, and he threw it all away to prey on grandmothers with Alzheimer's and amputees who couldn't use the braces he was billing for. The Department of Justice's healthcare fraud strike force has charged more than 6,200 defendants since 2007 and identified more than $45 billion in fraudulent billing. Joel French's case stands as one of the most egregious ever prosecuted. The man who played in front of thousands of screaming fans in Seattle will now spend most of the next decade and a half behind bars. Next, Robert McHune. If Joel French's story is about attacking people outside the NFL, the next chapter is about something even more personal. This is the story of former NFL players stealing from other former NFL players. And the man at the center of it is Robert McHune. To understand this scheme, you first need to understand what the Gene Upshaw NFL Player Health Reimbursement Account Plan actually is. When the NFL and the Players Union negotiated the 2006 collective bargaining agreement, one of the benefits that came out of it was a healthcare reimbursement fund specifically for retired players. The plan allowed former NFL players, their spouses, and their dependents to be reimbursed, tax-free, for out-of-pocket medical expenses not covered by insurance. The maximum benefit? Up to $350,000 per player. Think about what that fund was designed for. Former players dealing with the long-term consequences of a career in professional football. Joint replacements, neurological treatment, the very real, very painful physical toll that playing in the NFL takes on a human body. Robert McHune, a former linebacker who played for several NFL teams, looked at that fund and saw something else entirely. He saw a target. McHune orchestrated a nationwide scheme to submit false and fraudulent claims to the plan, not just for himself, but on behalf of dozens of other former players, many of whom willingly participated. Here's how he did it. McHune would obtain the personal identifying information of other former NFL players: names, insurance ID numbers, social security numbers, addresses, dates of birth. With that information, he could file claims as though he were those players, seeking reimbursement for expensive medical equipment. The equipment listed on those claims? Hyperbaric oxygen chambers, ultrasound machines, electromagnetic therapy devices. Equipment that sounds entirely plausible for a former NFL player to need. Equipment that cost tens of thousands of dollars. Equipment that, in many cases, was never actually purchased or used. McHune didn't do this quietly in the dark. He recruited other former players into the scheme, collected kickbacks for every fraudulent claim he filed, and ran it like a business operation. Between June 2017 and April 2018 alone, a span of less than a year, McHune submitted 68 fraudulent claims on behalf of 51 different former players. When all was said and done, the scheme resulted in approximately $2.9 million in false claims being submitted to the plan, with about $2.5 million actually being paid out. McHune pleaded guilty to an extraordinary list of charges. 1 count of conspiracy to commit healthcare fraud and wire fraud, 10 counts of wire fraud, 12 counts of healthcare fraud, and 3 counts of aggravated identity theft. He was sentenced to federal prison, but McHune didn't act alone. And 2 of his co-conspirators were names that NFL fans actually recognized. Next, Clinton Portis. Clinton Portis was, at his peak, one of the most electrifying running backs in the NFL. Drafted in the 2nd round by the Denver Broncos in 2002, Portis burst onto the scene immediately. In his rookie season, he ran for over 1,500 yards. In his second season, He topped 1,500 again. Back-to-back seasons over 1,500 rushing yards in his first 2 years in the league. Those are numbers that put you in the conversation for all-time greats. He was traded to Washington, where he became the face of the franchise. Fans loved his energy, his personality, the way he played the game with visible joy. When his career ended after a 2010 concussion, Portis walked away with 2 Pro Bowl selections, over 9,000 career rushing yards, and a reputation as one of the most entertaining players of his generation. But the years after football were hard. In 2018, Portis publicly revealed he had lost virtually all of his NFL earnings, an estimated $43 million, to bad investments, poor financial decisions, and people around him who he trusted and shouldn't have. He was broke, and somewhere in that financial desperation, he made the decision that would define the second half of his public story. Clinton Portis became one of Robert McHune's recruits. According to court documents, Portis caused the submission of false and fraudulent claims to the NFL's Player Health Reimbursement Plan on his own behalf. Over a 2-month period, obtaining $99,264 in benefits for expensive medical equipment that was never actually provided to him. Nearly $100,000. For a man who once signed contracts worth tens of millions. In some ways, that contrast is the most devastating part of this story. Portis wasn't stealing to fund a lavish lifestyle at this point. He was stealing because he needed the money, because the $43 million was gone, because the NFL career that was supposed to set him up for life had ended, and the life it was supposed to set up had collapsed. Portis pleaded guilty and was sentenced to 6 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. In interviews after his conviction became public, Portis spoke openly about the pressures he faced after leaving football, the financial exploitation, the bad advice, the difficulty of adjusting to life outside the league. None of that excuses what he did. The NFL's reimbursement plan existed to help genuinely struggling former players. By submitting fraudulent claims, Portis and the others were directly taking money away from that fund, money that could have gone to players who legitimately needed it. But his story is a warning about what can happen when a man builds his entire identity around a career that has a shelf life of a few years. About what happens when the money runs out and the pride remains. Next, Tamarick Vanover. Not everyone in a fraud scheme is the mastermind. Sometimes the most dangerous role is the recruiter, the person who pulls others in. That was Tamarick Vanover's role. Vanover played in the NFL from 1995 to 2000, spending time with the Kansas City Chiefs, Jacksonville Jaguars, and San Diego Chargers. He was known primarily as a return specialist, a player who made his living in the high-risk, high-reward world of kickoff and punt returns. His playing career was over long before the fraud scheme began. But when Robert McHune needed people to help expand the operation, Vanover became a key figure. According to court documents, Vanover didn't just participate in the scheme for himself. He actively recruited 3 other former NFL players, bringing them into the fraudulent health reimbursement plan conspiracy. He helped them understand how to submit false claims. He assisted in the process of obtaining reimbursements for expensive medical equipment that was never purchased or used. He served as a bridge between McHune's operation and a wider network of former players willing to exploit the fund. The total amount Vanover obtained through the scheme was $159,510. Like Portis and McHune, Vanover pleaded guilty to his role in the conspiracy. His cooperation and guilty plea were factors in the legal proceedings, but his actions had a ripple effect. By recruiting 3 additional players, he amplified the damage done to a fund that existed to protect the very community he was stealing from. There's something particularly troubling about the recruiter role in a scheme like this. McHune may have been the architect, but Vanover helped build the walls. Every person he brought into the fraud was another former player whose legacy now carried this conviction. Another person whose financial desperation or greed had been weaponized against the system designed to help them. Next, Joe Klecko. Now we get to one of the most complicated stories on this list. Because Joe Klecko isn't just any former NFL player. Joe Klecko is a Pro Football Hall of Famer. And for over 30 years, The conviction that preceded that honor was something most casual NFL fans simply didn't know about. Let's start with who Klecko was on the field, because the football story is genuinely extraordinary. Klecko spent most of his career, 11 of his 12 professional seasons, with the New York Jets. He was a cornerstone of one of the most feared defensive lines in NFL history, a unit that became known as the New York Sack Exchange. In 1981 alone, Klecko recorded an estimated 20.5 sacks, a number that, in any other era, would have already sealed his Hall of Fame status. What made Klecko truly remarkable was his versatility. He played defensive tackle. He played nose tackle. He played defensive end. In a single career, he was arguably one of the best in the league at multiple positions on the defensive line. Injuries slowed him. His career ended. And like many players of his generation, the transition out of football came without the financial infrastructure that exists today. In 1993, Joe Klecko was investigated in connection with an auto insurance fraud scheme. The details, as reconstructed from court documents and reporting, paint a picture of a man who got involved in financial misconduct during a difficult post-football period, making false claims related to car insurance. Klecko was not convicted of the fraud itself. What he was convicted of was perjury, lying to a federal grand jury that was investigating the insurance fraud case. He pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to 3 months in federal prison. He served his time, and then, for decades, he went on living his life, doing television work, staying connected to the NFL community, building a post-football career. In 2023, 30 years after that conviction, the Pro Football Hall of Fame finally inducted Joe Klecko. There are football fans who will tell you the Hall of Fame was long overdue for Klecko, that the wait was unjust, that his performance on the field was hall-worthy from the moment he retired. And there are others who feel the perjury conviction and the insurance fraud at the center of it should have been weighed more heavily. What's undeniable is that Klecko's story represents something unique on this list. He wasn't running a massive fraud operation. He wasn't targeting vulnerable people. His was a crime of a different scale, but it was still a crime. And the perjury that grew out of it put him inside a federal prison. In February 2026, President Trump pardoned Klecko, along with 4 other former NFL players, wiping the federal conviction from his record. Whether you view that pardon as justice or as a powerful man receiving preferential treatment, one fact remains unchanged. Joe Klecko, NFL Hall of Famer, spent 3 months in federal prison for fraud-related crimes. That's part of his story now, forever. Next, Billy Cannon. Every list has its wild card, its story that feels almost too unbelievable to be real. For this video, that story belongs to Billy Cannon. Cannon's football story begins at LSU, where he became one of the most celebrated college football players in history. In 1959, he won the Heisman Trophy, the most prestigious individual award in college football. He was the best player in the country, and everyone knew it. He went on to play professionally in both the AFL and the NFL, spending time with the Houston Oilers, Oakland Raiders, and Kansas City Chiefs. He was an AFL All-Star, a legitimate professional football star at the highest level. After his playing career ended, Cannon built a successful second career as a licensed orthodontist in Louisiana, a dentist with a Heisman Trophy on the wall. He was respected in his community. He was a legend. And then, in 1983, the FBI raided his home. What they found shocked everyone who knew him. Billy Cannon, Heisman Trophy winner and practicing dentist, had been operating a counterfeiting ring. Not a small one. Cannon and his associates had produced approximately $6 million in counterfeit $100 bills, described at the time as some of the most sophisticated counterfeit currency ever produced in the United States. Think about the audacity of that for a moment. A man with a dental practice, a man with a Heisman Trophy, a man who had everything to lose, and who chose to run a counterfeiting operation out of his home. The FBI didn't just find the finished product. They found the printing equipment, the paper, the operation in full. Cannon pleaded guilty. He was sentenced to federal prison and served approximately 2.5 years behind bars. He lost his dental license. The Heisman Trophy that had defined his legacy was tarnished forever. Years later, in an interview, Cannon reflected on what drove him to it. He spoke about financial pressure, about bad decisions, about a moment of catastrophic judgment that destroyed everything he had built in the years after football. He died in 2018, his legacy permanently split between the magnificent football player he was and the federal criminal he became. In February 2026, President Trump granted Cannon a posthumous pardon, wiping his federal conviction from the record more than 3 decades after his conviction and 8 years after his death. Whether you believe posthumous pardons carry meaningful weight is a philosophical question. But Billy Cannon's story carries a weight of its own. The weight of a man who reached the absolute pinnacle of his sport and then dismantled his own legend with his own hands. So what do we do with all of this? 6 men, millions of dollars stolen, federal prison sentences, careers that should have been complete stories, defined by touchdowns and championships and records, now permanently attached to words like fraud and conviction and federal indictment. It would be easy to simply write these men off as criminals who got what they deserved. And in a legal sense, they did get what they deserved. The justice system worked. They were caught, they were prosecuted, and most of them went to prison. But there's a deeper conversation worth having here. The NFL makes enormous amounts of money. The television deals, the ticket sales, the merchandise. We're talking about a league that generates roughly $20 billion a year. And yet, study after study has shown that a staggering number of former NFL players end up in serious financial trouble within years of leaving the league. A 2009 Sports Illustrated report found that within 2 years of retirement, an estimated 78% of former NFL players had gone broke or were under significant financial stress. 78%. Clinton Portis lost $43 million. And even with that specific number attached to one individual, it barely registers as unusual in the broader landscape of post-NFL financial disaster. That doesn't excuse fraud. It doesn't excuse stealing from a healthcare fund designed to help former players. It certainly doesn't excuse targeting elderly people with dementia or billing Medicare for amputees, missing limbs. But it does ask us to interrogate the system that produces these outcomes. The NFL requires players to be ready to perform at elite athletic levels from the time they're teenagers. The culture of professional football doesn't exactly reward vulnerability, financial education, or long-term planning. Players are surrounded by agents, advisors, and hangers-on, some legitimate, many not. And when the income stops, the infrastructure collapses. Robert McHune didn't just steal for himself. He recruited a network of former players, men who had played in the NFL, men who had earned real money, men who had reached the top of their profession, into a fraud scheme. The fact that so many were willing to participate tells you something about the desperation, real or perceived, that existed in that community. Joel French took a different path entirely. Outright predatory fraud, targeting the most vulnerable people in society. His case represents something harder to contextualize through the lens of post-NFL struggle. This wasn't desperation. This was greed, executed with calculation and scale. Joe Klecko's story belongs in a third category, a man of a different generation, when financial support for retiring players was even thinner, who made a bad decision and paid a real price for it. And Billy Cannon sits alone in his own category, a legend whose post-career choices remain genuinely baffling, a man who had rebuilt himself into a respected professional and then detonated that rebuild for reasons that still don't fully make sense. What connects all 6 of them is the moment of decision. The moment when a former NFL player looked at the options in front of him and chose the fraudulent one. That moment doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens in context, financial context, psychological context, the context of a culture that builds men up to superhuman status for a decade and then sets them down in ordinary life with no real roadmap. Understanding that context isn't the same as forgiving the crimes. But it might be the only way to prevent the next Joel French, the next Clinton Portis, the next name we're going to be covering in a video exactly like this one. 6 former NFL players. Fraud, counterfeiting, and healthcare theft on a scale that ranged from tens of thousands to hundreds of millions of dollars. Joel French, 16 years in federal prison for a $200 million Medicare scheme that preyed on the elderly and disabled veterans. Robert McHune, the architect of a scheme that corrupted dozens of former players and drained nearly $2.5 million from a fund meant to protect them. Clinton Portis, one of the greatest running backs of his generation, who lost a fortune and then tried to steal back a fraction of it. Tamarick Vanover, the recruiter who pulled others into the fraud network. Joe Klecko, a Hall of Famer with a conviction most fans never knew about until he was already enshrined in Canton. And Billy Cannon, a Heisman Trophy winner who somehow went from the pinnacle of American sport to running a counterfeiting ring out of his house. Their football careers are real. The records are real. The highlights are real. And the convictions are real too. If you found this video worthwhile, subscribe and hit the notification bell. We cover the NFL stories that go deeper than the box score. The ones that matter long after the final whistle blows. We'll see you in the next one. Thank you for watching.